It's the weekend, but we're going to keep on grinding. Welcome to Drafting Out Loud, market movers on Underdog for 321.26. Stay till the end to see some crazy value you can get on Underdog relative to DraftKings. That being said, let's jump right into it. First, we're going to look at the ADP risers for Underdog. We're looking at things today from a week perspective, like how much have they risen in the week versus on a day or month perspective. Uh, I just couldn't find much correlation for the day. I found the week data a little more interesting. So that's what we're going to go over today. And you can see that a lot of the players that you might be targeting are still rising, while one of them is actually falling. And you should take note of that, or at least he's not rising as much anymore. So let's talk about that one first. Jalen Waddle, you can see, fell for the day. Some people were predicting him all the way up into the high 20s. I kind of mentioned that probably staying where he was made sense. I could justify him falling potentially, or maybe rising, but I didn't want to just pull him up the board crazy high. And I just wanted to kind of take him as he continued to slide a little bit. I took him at 44 in one draft. And I think this might be saying that drafting him much before 44 doesn't make too much sense. I've seen him even fall into the 50s, like into the late 50s, I believe it is, on some drafts, like the late part of the next round. So I think Jalen Waddle's someone that you can, if you're just trying to get closing line value, he's someone that you can kind of cool off on potentially. We'll evaluate again every day basically, but he might be someone you can cool off on Underdog, as he might be chilling here around the pick 47. I do think if he does that, that you maybe even try to push him around into the next round. I don't know how much value he's going to pay off here, so don't overdraft him if you don't need to. I think he is kind of interesting at that turn, because you can then maybe get some interesting pairings going on as well. If you think about it, for example, Denver has three other teams that they're more likely to play in week 17: KC, the Chargers, and the Raiders. You have the Brock Bowers, who is at the front end of the draft, just like Waddle is right now. You can get the KC guys going kind of in a bunch of different places. And even the Chargers are starting to fall a little bit as well, maybe at the back end of the draft. So it does make sense to kind of maybe play chicken with Waddle sometimes with other drafters, see if you can get him around the turn. That way you don't have to overdraft him, especially if his ADP is not going to continue to rise. You can cool off a little. Now, some players that are still rising here: Chris Rodriguez still rising at 1.4% for the day and almost 15% for the week and 33% for the month. So he's just still ticking up and ticking up. And he's now almost breaking the 150 point. Now, at some point in time here, the risk is outweighs the reward. I don't know where that is exactly. Again, some people have Chris Rodriguez being the starter potentially in Jacksonville. That being said, you got to think about it. Even if he is the starter, he's not the pass catcher. So how much extra value does he have? So keep that in mind. I wouldn't be going too above on this. On one draft, I got him essentially at ADP yesterday, and it was a Jacksonville stack as well. And I do think that Chris Rodriguez, even though he's not a pass catcher, is an interesting pick if you can get him past ADP. This is kind of like the argument for when you draft the backup for any team. Basically, you're kind of hoping like, okay, well, if the backup gets the primary role, does that mean that they're throwing the ball more because their running back isn't as good potentially, type of thing? And if that's the case, then you get the biggest bang for your buck, both for the quarterback and the receiver. Now, of course, the primary has its benefits as well, right? Like, they're more likely to catch the ball, assuming they're a pass catching running back, like Tootin is expected to be. And if that happens, then you get the bang for your buck for having the QB and the wide receiver there too. That being said, most of the time, more of the correlation people say is coming from the traditional pass catchers, like your wide receivers and maybe tight ends. Mooney is still rising up the board here, and who knows what he's going to be on the Giants. So I wouldn't be kind of pulling him up. But if you have a Giant stack, I do like him as a late round pick. I'm not sure how much more valuable he is than Slayton, but you got Mooney, you got Isaiah Likely. So I do like if you can catch a falling dart on one of your teams and then backstack him. I haven't been lucky enough to do that in the right situation, but I do think start, should be a target if he falls, knowing that you got a lot of, potentially exciting candidates below there. Kirk, who's now in San Francisco, rising up the board a bit. Chig, who's in Washington, still rising up the board. I think Chig is definitely a value here at 172. Christian Kirk, he's a player, but I don't think he's a value. Malik Washington rising up the board because he's the only man left standing to some people in Miami. They do have a couple other players, but I think Malik Washington is an interesting player here at 200. Justin Jefferson's ticking up the board for the week. He's almost about to surpass CeeDee Lamb or Amon Ra, whoever is kind of the one right before him. Emmanuel Wilson still rising up the board, and a good pick, like we said, in definitely in like zero RB rooms. Pacheco, I don't know how excited I am, but he's rising up the boards. We'll skip Bijan. He's one or two. Geno Smith still slowly rising up the boards. I was hoping he'd stay in the 200s, but when you get into these 170s, if you have a team built out and you really need a quarterback, I don't think there's many players where you're like, oh, I need that player instead of Geno Smith. So it makes sense to get him around here, especially if you can kind of get a stack going with him, like a late round emergency stack. A.D. Mitchell's around here, as well as Mason Taylor. So there's some interesting pieces, I think, that are the potential, not like the most primary, but still kind of some of their bigger targets. David Montgomery is finally rising up the boards here on Underdog, and he's no longer the best value, but he still definitely is a value on Underdog. I'd be taking him here even a little bit earlier. My goal would, of course, be to push him around, but if he's going to start rising up, I think you need to start targeting him in drafts before he rises up too much. And then we got three more on the board here. Keaton Mitchell still rising. Some people super excited. He's actually in on the Chargers now. We need to update that on the chart. Hollywood Brown, a great late round stack for Philadelphia. I'm not excited about him, but Hurts is another one of those players where you see him fall sometimes past the A.J. Brown, past the Saquon Barkley, past the Devonta Smith drafters, and just you end up getting them super late. When you do that, you want to try to get Goddard, or now you want to try to get Hollywood Brown. And then Bo Nix now is being drafted inside the top 100. Makes sense because they got Waddle, expected to have a more dynamic offense now. I liked Bo Nix before because you could backstack him with a lot of intriguing targets. All those targets are less intriguing now and falling. If you can get a falling Bo Nix, or if you, of course, correlate him with Jalen Waddle or Cortland Sutton, I think that makes sense. That being said, it kind of stinks that we've lost a intriguing backstack QB. That being said, if you do end up getting him, he does have a lot of people you can backstack with, but they are not at their lowest value yet, which again makes it tough. So you might want to think about backstacking him later on, not now. If you want to try to grab his other pieces at their cheapest value, like Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, you get for like nothing, and then Evan Ingram for nothing. But I think Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin are the more exciting pieces. You can get some interesting stacks right now, and that you could get like a Cortland Sutton, followed by Bo Nix, followed by J.K. Dobbins in a draft. That being said, Sutton should probably be falling as well. So you are probably grabbing him at a little bit of a premium if you draft him right now. But you are getting an interesting stack right now that makes sense in those three players. And J.K. Dobbins might be the starter in Denver instead of the other guy who just doesn't, RJ Harvey, who just doesn't seem to be getting the love from Denver. Let's look at our fallers. Here are our fallers. Speaking of Denver, Troy Franklin, Pat Bryant, Cortland Sutton, and in fact, Marvin Mims has fallen off. Or no, he's right here. And Marvin Mims are 4 of the top 5 fallers. We know why. And they're still falling. So again, if you are drafting them now, which they're so late that maybe it doesn't matter as much. That being said, I'd love to see these players here like in the 200s. And Marvin Mims, like I said, he's basically free at this point in time. Theo Johnson's still falling as he should be. I think he's a nice like last round flyer in certain drafts. Maybe you have one of the teams that is most likely to be going week 17 against the Giants. So if you got like a Phillies thing going, or not Phillies, sorry, an Eagles thing going, or a Dallas thing going, or a Commanders thing going, or of course the New York Giants thing going, Theo Johnson is an interesting pick there. He should be, I would imagine, their inline tight end, while likely is more of an outside tight end. So I think they do probably play different positions a little bit. So why can't Theo Johnson still do a little something something? Vidal falling makes sense because people are more concerned about Keaton Mitchell. I think Vidal has value here. Why not? And we don't know if Keaton Mitchell is going to be the other guy or not. And people expect Vidal to have the third down role, and Vidal, made it happen last year in his opportunities. Why can't he do that again? So if you need another running back, I think you're definitely you have a good shot of benefiting here in the 190s, depending on who else is available. There are some other players that are maybe more exciting, like those other running backs that don't have jobs just yet, because if you draft them and then they get a job in a place that's exciting, then they just shoot up the boards. So you have a chance for better closing line value with those other players. That being said, Vidal's got a job, most likely, and maybe an intriguing one on the Chargers. Ashton Genty falling, not for the day, but for the week, basically to the very end of the first round here. Baishal Tootin. So here's some interesting fallers. Just like Waddle was interesting as far as like really not rising. Is that what it was? Just not rising. Actually, he's falling for the day. But he's rising for the whole week. We have actually falling now for the week. Tootin. He was expected to rise up a ton. Pick number 60. Where are we talking there? Is that the fifth round? The end of the fifth round, right? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's intriguing that he stopped there because a lot of people were trying to grab him much earlier in the fifth round. I did it a couple times. I had mentioned I wasn't a fan of it when you got like Trevion Henderson there as well. I did it like once or twice just because there was a fear that you'd end up with like no Tootin at all, and he's going to totally surpass Trevion Henderson. But maybe that's not going to happen, and maybe he's kind of stuck here around the fifth round. And I think some of that might be just because Rodriguez we have as the number one riser, so people are a little weary of Tootin because he might not be the starter. Some people think, and they think that Chris Rodriguez might be the starter, just into his role a lot. Maybe a legitimate fear. Tootin's definitely a more exciting player. If you can catch him in a draft where he's falling more, like scoop him up, I'd say. But I don't think you want to be chasing him up the boards if he's not rising up the boards anymore. Alvin Kamara falling here. I think that's a hard pick to take. Stephon Diggs still falling. And I think I've seen him like go in the 150s, and Deebo Samuel there is falling at 150. I think they're both interesting picks that you should be not targeting, but if you need another wide receiver, why not just click them? We are pretty sure that once they finally, and we got to change that to Deebo Samuel's a free agent, not Washington. Once they get signed, you'd expect them to rise up the boards a significant amount. So yeah, why not do that? Bucky Irving falling still. He on Underdog, he's not into the fourth round yet. On DraftKings, he's actually in the fourth round already. Luther Burden falling a tad and falling for the week as well. So that's kind of interesting. He skyrocketed up the boards once once they traded DJ Moore. I think this is a little bit of just the momentum finally fading, and now he's just starting to kind of maybe trickle down a tad. Michael Penix still falling down the boards, and I think from what I've read, he's expected to get a shot at being the starter. Like they're not saying that Tua is gonna run with the job. And so if you want one of them for the end of the year, I think the bet is probably that Michael Penix has the job at the end of the year. I think if he falls in your draft, you only have two QBs and you don't see anything else intriguing. I think just throwing a Penix on your team, hoping that you get the last 10 weeks of the season or something like that is a not a bad bet for like a last round pick. You'll probably get a lot more value out of that versus anything else. And then also intriguing if you have like an Atlanta player on your team is if you can grab both of the Atlanta QBs relatively late as well. Woody Mark's falling just because they got David Montgomery. And once he starts falling in here into the 150s, 160s, 170s, depending on what else is available, he becomes more and more of, I think, like a player that you just don't mind clicking. I don't think you're ever excited about it, but at some point in time, he's got to be an interesting pick. Last but not least, we got our platform values. This is what I was selling at the beginning. And two players I think that you got to be targeting on Underdog are DJ Moore and Kenneth Walker. We've talked about these players before, but look at this. DJ Moore, 40% almost. Kenneth Walker, 35% value. Kenneth Walker, and then David Montgomery. Actually, we got Kenneth Walker, 35%. The two that I think you need to target the most are DJ Moore and David Montgomery, if you ask me. Now, Kenneth Walker here at the back half of the second, I think is nice. We were expecting him to kind of get to this 14 range, just like DK, and he's maybe paused even here on DK a little bit because we were expecting him to hit like a 13 instead of a 14 point something. So maybe he's pausing here. The momentum's finally fading. Um, so maybe he's even fading here on Underdog at pick 20. I think he's more of a value on Underdog than he is on DraftKings, though. So I think these three players are three players you want to be targeting, especially DJ Moore and David Montgomery. That being said, Kenneth Walker is definitely more exciting, but you're paying a price for it. DJ Moore, he's going to get his value mainly from touchdowns. Kenneth Walker, probably going to get his value from hopefully touchdowns, right? And then David Montgomery, going to get his value definitely from touchdowns and yards. Also, Kenneth Walker yards as well. None of these players are going to be catching the most passes relative to other wide receivers or relative to other running backs. But on Underdog, it's a half point PPR. You want to go and grab these three players at these values. We already saw that David Montgomery is starting to rise. He was like at 70. He's now at 67. So I think you want to start pulling him up your board just a little bit so you can get kind of different unique teams as you go along. So right now he's going at 67. Maybe you get around pick 60, in the mid 60s or slightly before that, like 63, 64, 65, 66, depending on your team build and what you need. Take him instead of someone else, depending on what's going on there. Zach Charbonnet, as we've been saying, I don't know if he's a value here at 146, but he's here because he's not a value on DraftKings at all. It's picks like this that make DraftKings probably the place you want to draft in some cases. Like someone else can take this guy at 118, and you can then get someone that's pretty exciting around that draft slot. But then it's players like this that make it exciting to draft on underdogs. So it's like, what do you want out of your drafts? Do you want maybe the easy button, or do you want the value button? Depends. Parker Washington, still a value. He's been on this list since the beginning. That being said, he's starting to tick up on DraftKings, which means there's tick down on DraftKings, going from the 50s to 55s to 61. So he's going to slowly move down this value chart, most likely, depending on how things shake out. Wan'Dale Robinson's been on here as well. A fixture makes sense because he's more of a PPR guy. Romeo Doubs is on this chart, and I don't understand this one. I think 92 is a little too rich. 109, maybe slightly too cheap, possibly, right? Meet in the middle at 100 or something like that. And maybe that makes sense. That being said, there's a lot of risk in his profile because New England could still get another wide receiver. And if that happens, then you got to see him start kind of moving down the board a little bit from 109 to, I don't know, 115, 120. I don't know. Who knows? But you'd expect him to lose some of those pick ADP that he's gained as he got traded or signed with New England. Colby Parkinson, I think, is a great late round pick if you need tight ends. I'll say it again. You get like a Parkinson Ferguson thing and get both of the top Rams tight ends. I think that's exciting if you're going with some kind of really cheap tight end build. McCaffrey, first round pick, get him if you can get him. And then you have Josh Allen here, like we were talking about. He's falling down a little bit because he's now being drafted inside the top 30. But if you can get a Allen Moore thing going on, both at values on Underdog relative to DraftKings, I think you could do worse than that. So go ahead and make that happen. Rice, still at the back half of the third round. I'm told he gets into the fourth round. I haven't seen it, but I'd take him if I could get him in the fourth round. And I don't know, maybe even here at the back half of the third. I don't think I've had many opportunities recently to do that. Loveland, I think, is a really exciting pick, if you ask me. He just got peppered with so many targets. They felt very intentional and repeatable. You could see that just happen all year long. And I felt like it was more intentional and repeatable in a way that was different than the touches that Luther Burden got. So I think Loveland's an interesting pick. It stinks he goes so early. You'd kind of hope as like a tight end that he'd have you maybe get even more value from him. That being said, if you take him here and it becomes the number one tight end, which I think he could be, and that's tough to say with two other very extremely talented tight ends. But if he kind of stays pace with those other two, then of course you got a lot of value there too. And I don't think there's that much risk. There's always risk in all players when you're drafting this early, but I think he demonstrated that this is something that he can do on a game in, game out basis. So it's an exciting pick if you can get him, especially if he falls into the fifth round. Thank you very much. Igbuka, a value on underdog, um, and someone that maybe you should be targeting. He was rising up the boards. I think he must have slowed down a tad since he's not on our sheet right now for the day. But it makes sense he's rising up the boards once Mike Evans didn't sign back with Tampa Bay. And I think like Igbuka and Godwin are players that are you want to target. And then after that, we have Shedeur Sanders here on the last value. And this is just representing all the QBs essentially, because all the QBs are slightly more, you get slightly more value on underdog than you draft DraftKings. So if you want to, I don't even know, I don't even know how to attack that to tell you the truth, really. It's not like you're getting too much value, extra value, but just realize that maybe you can push your QBs a little bit more on underdog than DraftKings if you are going from one platform to another. So just being aware of where you're drafting, I think, when it comes to the QBs. Either way, you can still get locked out of QB on either site, and I've done that definitely. When you try to push them and you're like, oh, darn, shouldn't have done that at all. Lesson learned, but I'll do it again anyways type of thing. But as we finish this off here, what do we want to do? I think we want to be targeting DJ Moore and David Montgomery, definitely. I still think Parker Washington is a nice pick. Wan'Dale Robinson is a nice pick in the 100s if you need to still get a QB, because you can then try to get Ward later on also. Parkinson's a good get out of jail, especially with Ferguson at tight end. So there's players here that you can definitely target as you go through things. Sanders at the very end of the draft, I don't know how much value there is there. We don't know if he's going to be the starter, and even when he was the starter, he was getting like less than 10 points a game. So where's the value in that versus someone else that we think can break out? Unless you're convinced that Sanders is the person that can break out this year. And if you can convince me of that, then I guess I'm all over that pick right there. But I don't know. I haven't really heard anyone that argued that Sanders is like a Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck that just didn't get an opportunity or something like that. So I'm kind of avoiding him. These fallers, I'd say just let most of them continue to fall. They're really the only players that I'm is there are players that have value here, but I think most of them are getting drafted too early. Um, don't I think the biggest thing here is that we don't want to be, again, hitting on, we don't want to be overdrafting Tootin, knowing that maybe he's not rising anymore, because even for the week he's falling. And then don't be chasing Bucky Irvin. Probably wait until if you really really want him, let him go to pick number 37 instead of 35 where you're at. If you're like at the very back half of the draft or something like that, force the other team to pass on him as well and get your other guy, assuming there's someone else that you like just as much or more than Bucky Irving, to make your team just slightly better than the other guys. So those are the players we're looking at for today. Those are our market movers. Let me know what you're thinking, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.